Hello, everyone. It is I, Miss Corey, once again. So, yay, you made it to Unit 2. Woohoo! Today we are going to be talking about Egypt. Isn't that exciting? So, here is your job. You're going to watch this Ed puzzle, of course. You're going to answer the questions. The questions I will ask you during the video will be in blue text. And then, of course, follow along with your study guide, and any important concepts on the study guide will be in red text. And of course, as always, if you have any questions, please email me or come to office hours. All right, learning target is just to describe the development characteristics and decline of the civilizations in Egypt, which we are going to do this week and next week. Another important thing is make sure that you watch these Ed Puzzle videos all the way to the end of the video. I know you might be tempted after the last question just to skip out on like the last few seconds of the video, but don't. You need to finish the video and see this like you're done symbol to the right hand side with like the little confetti thing, because if you don't get all the way to the end, um, there isn't a score that comes in on Schoology. Like that score that automatically comes in won't come in. So make sure you watch this all the way through. And if you have questions about that, let me know. All right, here's my first question for you today. When you hear the words ancient Egypt, what comes to mind? So a bunch of things might come to mind. You might think of Cleopatra, who's one of the most famous rulers of Egypt. You might think of mummies, because those are like one of the most interesting things in ancient history. You might think of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, because he was like really famous for being the boy king. You might think of the big pyramids at Giza, which we'll talk about as well. You might think of the gods, or you might think of some Hollywood adaptation of different historical events. So, this is kind of the sad part of all of this, is that we're not even going to be scratching the surface of the history of ancient Egypt, okay? So, there's over 3,000 years of history in ancient Egypt, but yet we're going to be spending 2 weeks on that, just two. Compare that to your US history classes. Okay, so that spans about a 500-year time period, and you get a whole year learning that. And we get 2 weeks for 3,000 years. So I'll try my best to go over some of the more important topics, but we're not even going to get into a lot of things. All right, so the first thing, let's talk about the geography of Egypt. So Egypt in the ancient time was broken up into two sections. There was Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Here's a map you can see up here. So Lower Egypt is towards the Mediterranean Sea. Upper Egypt is farther down inland in Egypt. So at first you're like, wait, shouldn't that be backwards? Shouldn't be upper like up, like north, and lower be like to the south? No, not in this case. You got to think about it kind of like upside down, okay? So you have to think about the flow of the river. So remember, rivers flow typically to the ocean. So Upper Egypt would be upstream of the river, Lower Egypt would be downstream of the river. All right, and here's the landscape of Egypt. So it's, like I said, it's broken to Upper and Lower Egypt. The Nile River, which I'm sure you guys have learned about in geography courses, is like the most important piece of like landscape in the entirety of Egypt. So the Nile River Valley is really fertile and lush. Um, and if there is not a river around, the land is pretty much just a desert and dead things are there. Northern Egypt is typically just a flat plateau, as southern Egypt has mountains that are really treacherous to pass. So here's a picture of like what those mountains look like. All right, so the time frame of ancient Egypt is laid out actually really nicely. I won't read out all these things, but you can see it starts about 3,400 BCE, and then it ends during the Roman period, which is 395 CE, and then everything in between. But for our 2 weeks that we get to spend on this, we're only going to focus on three sections. The first is going to be the Old Kingdom, the next is the Middle Kingdom, and then finally the New Kingdom. So those are the three time frames that we're going to focus on in the next 2 weeks. Another really important concept to learn is that the pharaohs, which we'll talk about pharaohs, so they're like kings, are broken down into dynasties. And what dynasties are is a line of family rulers in a country or a kingdom. So the pharaohs are parts of dynasties, and everyone ruling in a dynasty is related to the person or the first person who started the dynasty. So after like that whole line of family is dead or out of the picture, then a new dynasty would start. So yeah, new family line equals new dynasty. There's about 33 Egyptian dynasties, depends who you ask. All right, here's my next question for you. What is the difference between monotheistic and polytheistic? All right, so mono equals one. So that's where people in the religion worship one God. For example, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Okay, those are going to be monotheistic. Polytheistic, so poly means many. So there are the people in the religion worship many gods. For example, would be like the Greek gods, the Egyptian gods, um, and also Hinduism. All right, next we got to talk about the one, the only pharaohs. So they were the person who was the head of Lower Egypt or Upper Egypt or both. The Egyptian word that they used to refer to pharaohs is called Nazubit. So if you time traveled back into ancient Egypt, they would not call their kings or their rulers pharaohs. They would call them Nazubit. Pharaoh is more of a modern day term for them. And also, historians might use king instead of pharaoh because pretty much they're the same thing. And another really important thing to learn about pharaohs is that they're believed to be the reincarnation of Horus. Horus is one of the major gods in the Egyptian religion. It's the god of kingship in the sky. So a lot of the times you'll see pharaohs depicted like this. So the hat little thing that they always like you always see them wear, it's called a nemes. And no, it's not actually made out of gold. It's just cloth. Their beards, yes, I'm sorry to break all of your hearts, but they are fake. Okay, they did not actually grow beards like that. Like that would be super impressive. And then the kilt skirt thing is called a shendite. So next question: if a pharaoh is the reincarnation of the god Horus, not only would they have the role of politically ruling Egypt, but what other role do you think they would have? That's right, they're also in charge of religion, okay? Or at least they play a role in the ceremonies. Other roles include enacting laws, collecting taxes, being the commander in chief of the army, and they also had to do this thing called maintain Mot. And what Mot literally translates into is order. So that would be like the order of the universe, uh, balance, justice. And in order to maintain this Mot, um, they would have to like have these like divine thoughts and be like, oh, we need to go to war with like that country because Mott is telling me that we need more resources or something. It was pretty much just an excuse to go to war. Um, all right, so how do historians know mostly exact dates and timelines of ancient Egypt? So, depending on the historian, they might have like the dates a few years apart. Um, and that's okay. It depends on what you're basing it off of. But a lot of historians base it off of something called the King's List. Here's a photo of what it looks like today. What it is an inscription in the temple of Pharaoh Seti I, which he died about 1290 BCE. And it lists in chronological order the 75 pharaohs before him, which is like really nice for historians to know, right? Like they literally are giving like historians like a cheat book. It is really fragmented, so a lot of the names are missing, or they're just guessing upon them. But also, it includes gods who ruled before the pharaohs, according to the religion. Um, so that gets kind of confusing too. All right, so back into super ancient Egypt. So we're talking like before there was pyramids or anything like that. Okay, so there has been archaeologists findings of pre-human activity in the Nile Valley from 700,000 BCE. Between 5,400 and 3,400 BCE, there was a shift to agriculture, kind of like we talked about in Mesopotamia. So that includes fishing, sheep, goat, wheat, barley, irrigation canals, and of course, just like we talked about, the Euphrates and the Tigris, the Nile floods, and it produces great silt for farming. Um, and also, there was a shift from like everyone just being like farmers to having social and political power within societies, um, and that wealth equaled power. Okay, so before there was a unified Egypt, like the upper lower Egypts, each city within Egypt kind of ruled itself, and that's called a city state. Okay, so that's when a city that rules itself. So it's not a part of a larger country or kingdom that rules it. And it serves as cultural, religious, and economic center of that like small region around the city. And each city state typically had a main god that they worshipped. So although all the city states were independent of each other, they usually had about the same religion. And Egyptian city states traded with places as far away as Afghanistan. So, how do historians find Egyptian artworks, jewelry, inscription, and other cultural pieces? Yes. Did anyone guess this right? I'm interested to hear your answers. But yeah, graves, okay? So a lot of the pieces that still survive today are going to be buried in the ground with dead people, okay? Because they're buried in the ground, they're super well preserved because they're not touching any of the elements outside. They're also really well marked, and there's usually a lot of graves put together. So historians have found copper from Palestine, found lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. If you don't know what that is, that's that pretty blue rock up here. Um, and then there's also tomb inscriptions describing battles with these people called the Amu. And you're like, what the heck is an Amu? So that's an ancient Egyptian word for people who are from Asia. Okay, so now historians know that they had contact with people from Asia. All right, that's all I got for you for this lesson. Next up, you are going to do Unit 2, Lesson 3, which is going to be about the Old Kingdom. So that's when the pharaohs start coming into play. Otherwise, if you have any questions, you can let me know, email me, or come to office hours. Okay? All right, bye.